Good evening, David. Thank you so much for taking the time for your debut appearance on System Update. We're thrilled to have you.
Thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely. So let me start off by asking you this question before we get into the substance of your reporting, which is where I want to devote the majority of our time. Why is Pete Buttigieg the Secretary of Transportation?
It is an important question. It's certainly not because he has experience in managing transportation systems. I think if we're honest about it, which we always are at the Lever, that Pete Buttigieg got this as a kind of trophy, a kind of award, a political stepping stone, probably for his next run or potential run. So in other words, this was a job that was given to him as a kind of reward for running a spirited primary, a Democratic primary, presidential primary in 2020. Some have argued that it's a reward specifically for him kind of staying in the race and potentially reducing support for Bernie Sanders. But I guess speculation aside, it's not because he has experience running major transportation systems. And to my mind, that's part of the problem, that being Secretary of Transportation, as I think a lot of people are learning, if they are willing to learn and learn the facts, Secretary of Transportation is a real job. It is not kind of a trophy job. It's like a real job with very real responsibilities. And as I said, if Pete Buttigieg wanted kind of like a high profile job without a lot of responsibilities, just to kind of stay in the limelight, maybe he should have asked for like an ambassadorship or something. But Transportation Secretary is a very real job with very real responsibilities. And I just want to underscore one, under the law, it is the sole regulator of the airline industry. In other words, there's a federal preemption that says state attorneys generals, other state law enforcement officials, individuals cannot bring class actions. None of those people can regulate the airlines. There's one person in the United States of America who has the power under the current law to regulate the airlines, and that is Pete Buttigieg, a person, as I said, with no experience regulating or overseeing transportation systems.
Yeah, I mean, you could literally have stuck him in any other cabinet position where he would be equally qualified, namely unqualified, to do this job. I mean, people know that he was the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. But let me ask you about that, because I don't think it's exactly a secret that Pete Buttigieg has a lot of future political ambitions, presidential ambitions. Particularly, he ran for president. He actually did reasonably well, established himself as a possible, credible future Democratic presidential candidate. So you would think that when you get a position like Transportation Secretary, it's an opportunity to show the public you're on their side. A lot of people hate the airlines. A lot of people feel mistreated by the airlines. You wait on hold for hours oftentimes. Everybody knows the miseries of air travel. And so you would seem like, just from his self-interested perspective, that being very aggressive against these airlines would be not just a good thing to do for our country, but in his political self-interest. And yet, as your reporting shows, he's really done the opposite. He seems to go out of his way to side with the airline industry. Why is that? Looking at it from his self-interested perspective, what is that incentive scheme causing him to do that?
Well, my guess is that it's partially the power of the airline industry. I mean, the airline industry employs, for instance, a lot of revolving door lobbyists, some who were near the very top of the Democratic Party. The airline industry is a pretty reliable source of some campaign cash to Democrats, actually to both parties, to be clear. And I also think that there's kind of a pedigree here, that Pete Buttigieg comes out of a part of the Democratic Party, a part of really American politics, that is not a part that rewards people for pushing powerful actors, powerful corporations around. I mean, Pete Buttigieg, his first major job was being a consultant at McKinsey. As an example, after he was a consultant there, McKinsey was putting out materials suggesting ways that the airlines could extract more fees from their customers. Point being is not to say that Pete Buttigieg was working for the airlines when he was working for McKinsey. There's no evidence of that. But it is to say that if you come up in politics on a path where you're not pushing powerful people around, that you're instead serving powerful people, when you get into the role of Transportation Secretary, which is a regulator role, but you're there not because you're a regulator, not because you have experience overseeing transportation systems, then it's logical to expect that that person isn't necessarily going to try to necessarily crack down on a very powerful industry, even though to you and me and to many others looking at the situation, that would seem to be something he would want to do if he was looking ahead to a political future. But look, I think we live in a world now, Glenn, where a person like Pete Buttigieg expects that his side's media, whether MSNBC or whether it's sort of corporate media writ large, the CNNs, et cetera, that those folks aren't really going to report on the nitty gritty of him not doing his job. And he can just get on TV a lot and expect that Democratic primary voters in particular won't really notice his role or his action, his lack of action in these situations, and will effectively give him a pass. And that those who do hear of his role through reporting like ours, they have been, I think, and this is on a dynamic on both sides, people have been trained to defend the politicians in their parties rather than holding them accountable. So I think that's his calculation. He can keep a powerful industry happy that he's supposed to be regulating, and he can rely on or at least bet on the idea that voters in the Democratic Party won't really notice or hold him responsible for the catastrophes that we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm noticing this from doing this nightly show where, obviously one of the things you want is for people to come on with whom you have disagreements, especially politicians. I would love to, for example, question Democratic Party politicians about why they voted no to investigate the CIA and the FBI, but they have no incentives to do so because everybody can stay in their segregated little media circles and only go on with hosts that they know are going to essentially either ask them flattering questions or avoid the difficult ones, as he's managed to do. And that's why I think independent journalism, the kind you're doing, is so vital, because it does play this role. Let me ask you the kind of devil's advocate question, which is, when it comes to issues about regulation and whether the federal government should be more aggressive or less aggressive about regulation, it often falls into this kind of, archaic left-right debate about whether the government should be stepping in and telling Southwest Airlines that they need to change their behavior, or whether we should just kind of let the free market take care of that. And if they don't serve their customers, people will stop using Southwest, they'll go to a competitor, and Southwest will then fail as a company unless they improve. I think there are some industries where, even though I generally don't agree with that framework, where it's more applicable, and some that are less. How do you see that framework applying or not applying to the airline industry?
See, I look at this through one helpful metaphor would be the crime metaphor. That what Southwest is doing, it may not be like a criminal act under criminal law, but it is misconduct. It is mistreating its customers. The regulator in the metaphor is the cop on the beat. When crime goes up, people, and I think there's been a lot of overblown rhetoric about crime, so it's a careful metaphor here. But when crime goes up, a lot of people turn not just to blame the alleged perpetrators of the crime, they blame the politicians for not doing what's necessary to reduce crime, to deter crime. That word is really important. I think in the same using that metaphor for an industry like the airlines, that the airlines feel empowered to mistreat their customers with the expectation that the cop on the beat, the sole regulator, the sole enforcer, will not really crack down on them if they egregiously mistreat customers. So I've heard people say, look, Pete Buttigieg is not responsible for Southwest's computer failure. How can you blame Pete Buttigieg for Southwest refusing to upgrade its computers? That's Southwest Airlines, its executives' fault. Well, first of all, it is Southwest executives' fault. They paid themselves $112 million, paid out a $400 million shareholder dividend, while they knowingly allowed their computer system knowingly didn't make the investments that they knew were necessary to keep their computer systems upgraded. Of course they're to blame. But they made those decisions inside of a regulatory environment in which they basically assumed that from the past behavior, by the way, of many administrations' Department of Transportation and the current administration's Secretary of Transportation, they assumed that if their computer systems melted down, they would essentially face a slap on the wrist. Yeah, maybe they would face angry customers, but of course customers and the airline industry are caught in kind of oligopolistic markets where they don't effectively have a choice. It's hard in a lot of markets to just say, oh, I'm going to go to another airline. Sometimes Southwest is the only major carrier. So the airlines are saying, look, we know we need to make these upgrades. We could not pay the $400 million shareholder dividend. We could not pay our executives $112 million. And we could instead use that money to upgrade our computer systems, or we could enrich ourselves, enrich our shareholders, not make those upgrades. And in the off chance that the computer system completely melts down, look, all we got to worry about is, we don't really have to worry at all, because the Secretary of Transportation is Pete Buttigieg, who's going to probably only slap us on the wrist based on what he's already done, which is basically nothing except go on a late night television show and say airline travel is going to get better by the holidays, which of course it didn't. So again, I look at this as a framework of, I use the crime metaphor and policing essentially white collar crime or white collar misconduct. That's the right way, in my view, to look at the regulatory issue when it comes to an industry like the airlines.
So let me ask you specifically about that, because I think that's a crucial point. Everyone knows that experience where you fly, you get angry at an airline, you tell yourself, I'm never flying with you again, but you know deep down that it could just as easily have happened with the airlines right next to you, where you hear your friends saying, I'm never flying Delta, I'm never flying American, because there's really not competition in the traditional way. You can't just decide that you're going to go on a route. You need all kinds of regulatory permission. So even granting these kind of defenses that Democrats are offering for Buttigieg, the media is offering, inclement weather, Southwest archaic software system, both of which seem to be genuinely factors. What specifically was he being asked to do that would have made a difference that he refused, and what should he be doing now that he's not doing?
So a few things. First and foremost, to make clear that non-weather cancellations would be punished with serious fines. That was the major ask of the state attorneys general, to essentially say, if there are non-weather cancellations, it's not just you're going to refund the money, it's that you're going to face real deterrent fines that make those cancellations, that harm your profits with those cancellations. Now, there's also been requests for the old reciprocity rules, where an airline that cancels their flights, they can book people on other flights. Those used to be more strongly enforced, those rules. But it really came down to this deterrent. The idea that these companies can't just mass cancel flights, assuming that all they have to do is refunds. Now, there's also, the speed of refunds. A lot of times these airlines are playing fast and loose with, you have to call them to get a refund. You're going to call them multiple times to get a refund on a canceled flight and the like. So it's all of those nitty gritty rules like that. And for months, Buttigieg didn't do that. Now, he has now promised some stricter enforcement under a lot of pressure. And I'm proud that our reporting, even though we got criticized a lot by liberals for doing it, I'm proud that our reporting helped contribute to that pressure. And I should add one other thing that's very important here. The attorneys general from both parties were writing to the Congress. This is how dire the situation got. The attorneys general wrote to Congress saying that the agency, the Department of Transportation under Buttigieg, had so fallen down on the job that they need Congress to pass a whole new law that ends federal preemption, so that effectively the attorneys general of states and individual citizens, in terms of class action lawsuits, can do the regulatory job that the Department of the Transportation hasn't been doing. So I think that's a really important point here, which is that for a long time, the Transportation Department hasn't been doing what needs to be done. I think a lot of people understand that. It's not just the last 2 years, it's a long time, although the last 2 years have been probably the worst in modern history when it comes to the airline industry. And so what they're asking for is allow more cops effectively to be on the beat, policing this kind of white collar misconduct.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that, like so many of our debates, I do think this question about should the government be regulating, should we allow the free market to kind of thrive, has really changed politically, because it isn't the case that usually your interface with companies is, the company on the corner or the mid-sized regional company. We're kind of all subject to these corporate giants that don't look at us as human beings, that have completely kind of unhuman interactions. And I think that's opened a lot of people up to the idea that, it's kind of a form of repression dealing with these giant corporations. Let me, as the last question, David, and it's for now because I'm going to keep harassing you to come back on the show, ask you about a tweet that your colleague in the Sanders campaign, Nina Turner, posted earlier today where she wrote, quote, "Calling out the Department of Transportation is not homophobia." And she just kind of left it at that. I think the meaning implicit in that is pretty clear. But as somebody who led this reporting, who tends to be vocal in a way that you have to be when you don't have a big corporation behind you promoting your reporting, you're out there pounding the tables about it. I know that the reaction that you got was extremely vitriolic from Democrats who protect Pete Buttigieg. So what is it that Nina meant by that in terms of your own experience, and what has the reaction been to what is really just very basic, straightforward reporting about the failures of this department?
Sure. Look, I think what Nina is pointing to is the idea that anytime a politician is pushed to do their job in a legitimate way, there are defenders who will cite their identity as alleged proof that you're only pushing them because you hate their identity. In the case of Pete Buttigieg, he's gay, and so I think the idea is that there's been some liberals who've insinuated that, oh, you're just pressuring, you're just focusing on Pete Buttigieg, you're focusing pressure on Pete Buttigieg because you don't like gay people. Which, look, homophobia is a real thing in the world, but pushing a regulator to do their job, as far as I'm concerned, has nothing to do with homophobia and everything to do with asking somebody who's in a job to do the job that needs to be done to protect the public. Look, there's a lot of folks out there. I shouldn't say a lot. There are some folks out there who were big fans of Pete Buttigieg running and his presidential campaign, and they have been vociferously defending him with all of these different arguments. They've tried to deflect. They've tried to say it's Southwest Airlines. They've tried to say it's homophobia. And I come back to the idea that I don't care what party you're in. If you're in a regulatory job, you should expect the public to demand that you do your job. I mean, I don't want to harken back to the halcyon days of the Bush administration. I'm obviously joking. I was no fan of the Bush administration. But there was a moment then when there was somebody who was unqualified or at least underqualified to be running the Federal Emergency Management Administration during and the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. President Bush touted him, sort of backed him. There was so much public outrage that government official.
What was his name? That was like Brown, something Brown.
Yeah, Michael Brown.
Michael Brown. Yeah.
And I'm not trying to pick on Michael Brown, but the point is that he felt the need to resign, and that's the system working. That is a small d democratic system working. A public official falls down on the job. There's public outrage. The public official has to answer for that, and the public official felt the pressure to resign. Now, whether you think Pete Buttigieg should resign or not in the ultimate carrying out whatever happens politically here, at minimum, Pete Buttigieg, as the Secretary of Transportation, the sole regulator of the airlines, it shouldn't be up for debate whether he should be asked tough questions and face public pressure to do his job. And the fact that we live in a world where saying that is controversial among his political tribe, aka the Democratic tribe, is a problem. And I want to be clear: this is not just a Democratic Party problem. It's the same thing with the Republicans. When the Republicans are running the government and one of their officials falls down on the job, you see very little coverage of that in conservative media. You see very little outrage from Republican rank and file. You see Republican rank and file often defending these folks, and the Democratic media machine criticizing them. And as you said, the problem is we're living in a world where facts are only surfaced and used to hold public officials accountable based on the perception by different media outlets and different political entities, based on their calculation of whether it will offend or inspire the partisan affiliation of the audiences. And that's a problem because ultimately what that means is that public officials face less accountability. the people who are in the best position to pressure Pete Buttigieg and actually get him to seriously regulate the airlines are Democratic voters, because those are the voters he feels most accountable to as part of a Democratic administration, and potentially he wants to attract in support of his future, whatever future political campaign he wants to be a part of. But we live in a world where the media landscape is designed to prevent that Democratic rank and file pressure on that regulator. And again, I would say that's a similar dynamic on the Republicans when they're in power. And it's all part of a problem, which ultimately means that public officials feel like they don't have to necessarily act as vociferously or vigorously as they need to, because they know they don't face as much pressure from their own rank and file party members.
Yep, I could not agree more with that entire media critique. I think just every last word of it, I heartily endorse. And I think the good news, though, David, is that the media outlets that have built their brand around fealty to a particular political party or an ideological camp, and who are therefore feeding people what they want to hear, is the part of our media ecosystem that is collapsing. Maybe not quickly enough, but definitely collapsing. And the part that is thriving is the part that is independent journalism. People like yourself who say, I'm not going to pretend I'm objective. I do have political opinions. I'm going to tell you what they are. But at the end of the day, my reporting is going to both speak for itself, and I'm going to follow it to wherever it leads, even if it means that I'm going to end up indicting the failures of someone in my own political party. And I really believe that's what the public craves in journalism more than anything. So I really want to encourage any of you who haven't already to follow David's reporting at Lever News. It's really a model of independent journalism. It's, as I said, reader supported, and it's exactly this sort of stuff that they do. It's very little opining for its own sake. It's kind of the shoe leather reporting that led David to discover these documents. So congratulations on this reporting, David, and I'm thrilled to have you here on our show. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Glenn. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, have a great night. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update. Catch our full shows for free, live weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on Rumble, and join our locals community at greenwald.locals.com for all of my written journalism, exclusive after-show Q&As, and more.